this guy who single-handedly pulled out dozens and dozens of bodies under fire saw himself as a murderer. And that's the importance of groups like this.
We texted them. We had phone calls with them. We had sessions with them because we know our people are waiting for it.
I don't think that any emergency service in the world provides something like this or has performed on something like this on such scale. Hi, I'm Dovie Maisel, Vice President of Operations for United Hatzalah, Israel's largest volunteer EMS organization.
Hi, I'm Avi Marcus, Deputy Director of the Medical Division.
And we're here for another episode of Masters of Emergency, the last episode of our very special mini-series of October 7th. Those of you who've listened and watched the previous 7 episodes, breaking apart October 7th, following step by step every hour of the day of this most challenging and horrific day, exposing a lot of our heroes, the heroic actions of people, regular people that left their homes, risking their lives, going out there and saving hundreds and hundreds of people on this very, very, very challenging day. So we're coming to the last episode, which is really talking about psychotrauma, talking about our souls, talking about the providers. Who cares for those who ran out to go and save lives? And for this, we have another guest back on who's been with us before, Dr. Sharon Slater. Hi.
Nice to be here.
Again. And we'll be talking a little bit about how, as an organization, we responded not to the gunshots and to the bombs and the RPGs and the missiles and to the thousands of people that were injured and killed, but how do we respond to our responders? Who cares for those who are caring for others? And Sharon, you were on a previous episode of ours when we were talking about psychotrauma and talking about how the organization works and operates and the values of what we do. Except on October 7th, this went to scale, just like everything else.
Well, I think what was unique about our organization on October 7th is that we already anticipated that we would need psychotrauma volunteers on top of the medical volunteers that we had. And I think that really was very unique in the fact that we thought ahead that this is going to be a huge need. Exactly. Avi, you remember in the morning, I think it was around 10 a.m. On October 7th, while this was still unfolding, before we even understood the magnitude of this incident, I remember asking you or Uriel, I don't remember who it was, to activate our psychotrauma unit and start calling in the professionals because we're going to need them this evening. That's what I said. I remember we're going to need them tonight. When this is over, didn't know that it'll be over only the next day. But
so we started even earlier. At 10 o'clock, we already started saying we need people for later on. But 7:30 in the morning, I was already on the phone with psychotrauma professionals, telling them, all the bosses, listen, this is a big scale. We need you on duty now to answer the phones. We have people calling. We're stuck. Our medics are stuck with patients, dead or stabbed or killed people for hours and hours, and they need to give psychotrauma to the other people that are there, to the families.
When you're saying stuck, explain to our listeners and viewers, what do you mean by stuck?
Stuck meaning they're in a house or any other place. There's still shooting going out. There's still Hamas all over the place. No ambulances around to come and take people to hospitals, and just being with patients for hours and hours. Now, that's one aspect. We had young kids calling saying, we're stuck now in the shelter, and we don't know if our parents are alive or dead the other way of the door. And if someone's knocking on the door now, what do we do? Do we open it not open. And we had psychotrauma professionals on the phone. We had Dr. Tamar Schlesinger for 12 and a half hours with 2 young kids. The parents were killed the other side of the door. And she dealt with them until army and police and people came to rescue them. So psychotrauma was not only from 10 o'clock thinking forwards for the next day, 2 days, 2 months, but looking at the every minute and second at the beginning of the day.
And I think that what you're saying, and also what you said, Dovie, when you said we have to figure out how we're going to get through the next day, I think at that point we were really thinking it's a day or maybe 2 days. None of us really understood the scope of the event and that psychotrauma wasn't going to be a 1 or 2 day kind of thing. We were going to have to hit up the people who had been involved in the terrorist incidents. We were going to have to help our own volunteers, and not for a day or 2 or a week or 2, but potentially for weeks and months.
But we weren't even contemplating that at that
Not
point.
at all.
We were just
Not
thinking
at all.
about the immediate response. And, protocol here is that any incident that it is severe trauma or death of a child or whatever, will reach out to the volunteer or the team that was on the ground, 1, 2, or 3 volunteers.
But on the other hand, we very quickly had tens of psychotrauma professionals on the phone and assisting. And I'll take you back to one of the other episodes we had about Meron, where our
The crowd crush, yeah.
the crowd crush, where psychotrauma in a matter of minutes and hours were up and working, meaning we know how to go from 0 to 100 in a matter of minutes and seconds. And that psychotrauma unit was, at the evening, we had like tens of psychotrauma professionals treating people.
So we keep talking about psychotrauma, but some of our viewers or listeners maybe are popping on for the first time on our podcast. Let's just try to give like a recap of like 1 minute, doctor, of what the psychotrauma unit is. When we say psychotrauma, what does that even mean?
Well, what United Hatzalah does, and this ties into what Avi's saying, when you say that within minutes you had dozens of psychotrauma volunteers on the ground. What we do is that in a situation where trauma seems likely, and certainly October 7th was that day, we have kind of a double perspective, one towards individuals, citizens who might need our help as professional psychologists, social workers, psychiatrists, and towards the medics who are treating them with expertise in trauma, all the latest knowledge in trauma. We're trained in the latest knowledge in trauma and how to try to lower the risk of PTSD developing later on. And so the quicker we're there, the better. I always like to say we try to get in before the cement is dry. And then there are our own volunteers, the medics, who have to see these horrific sights. And certainly October 7th was a day of horrific sights, sounds, and smells, and they become our focus as well.
So going back to October 7th, Avi, you were saying in the morning we had already our psychologists and therapists and social workers on the phone with our medics or with families on the ground, stuck at home, under fire, under attack in many different towns down south, and thinking ahead. When I told you at 10 o'clock, we're going to need full power, whatever we can for tonight, because when this is over, we're going to have an MCI of trauma for volunteers, especially when we have the experience of looking back at Meron, crowd crush, looking back at mass casualty incidents and terrorist attacks here in the past, and to see the effect on our people and how we operate in responding to them. This is on scale. And as the day was unfolding, it was emphasized even more, because at the end of this 24 hours, or 36 hours actually, by Sunday evening, when the vast majority of the terrorist attacks were over, there were still local battles, but in general, the vast majority of the 30 towns, villages were cleared of terrorists. So a lot of our volunteers who live down south, all of them were evicted from their homes because of the situation, because the war, iron swords broke out. So they were evicted from their homes, displaced, DPLs. And we understood that now there are many people down there, those who weren't evicted or didn't leave or need to stay for many different reasons, have no medical attention there. So we actually, we created one of this, like a camp, a logistical site with a medical center down south, just north of Sde Yoav. And we were staffing shifts and ambulances there for the next 2-3 weeks, round the clock, except the area was still a war zone. And looking back at the first 24 hours, we understood that, first of all, the sites are still there and are going to be there for days. And when I talk about sites, we're talking about roads and roadsides and houses that are still burning, bodies by hundreds everywhere. The aftermath here was almost 1,200 people that were murdered and slaughtered. And it's going to take days while we still need to operate in this, which means we're going to be exposing additional volunteers who are coming days after. We're still exposing them actively to these sites. So what we did was, and Sharon will be able to explain a little bit about how they actually did it, but when we would have shifts of, 50 or 60 volunteers coming down from Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or wherever to do their 12-hour shift down south, they'd get a psychotrauma team briefing before they go in. And then they get off shift. You remember, Avi? They were assembled. Go explain how
I
it
want
was
to
done.
add to that.
And then I want to, Sharon, afterwards we'll swing back over to you, because you have your whole story of going weeks from there moving forward. Avi, you were already drafted to the army.
I was, but our thoughts were, okay, we need to give assistance and help to our volunteers going into all these places, seeing all the dead people, dead bodies, etc., etc. What happened is this place we had in Sde Yoav, at the end of the day, army, police, special units went through us because we opened a big logistic place giving out food and drinks to people and to the soldiers, etc., etc. So Psychotrauma Station became Psychotrauma not only for our volunteers, but for other people coming out from the war zone, families, all kinds of police, etc., etc. So this place was aimed at the beginning, so-called, only for in-house, but it happened to be out-house.
It actually became a massive hub there, a humanitarian hub.
Yep.
It took, for those who aren't familiar with all the details, when the war broke out, hundreds of thousands of Israeli civilians were drafted into the reserves, into the army, and the IDF was not prepared. As they were not prepared for this attack, they were not prepared for drafting hundreds of thousands of people. So you have people that are drafted, except they don't have any food, they don't have drinks, they don't have sanitary equipment, whatever. And what we did in this logistical center and medical center that we created down south, I got to say, Israeli society at large and the volunteerism spirit was at a peak. We had the business community come together, and we had tractor trailers dropping off medical supplies, food, sanitary equipment, water, clothing for all these soldiers who were being drafted, and also for civilians who were stuck because there weren't any supplies to the stores in the area or anything. They couldn't leave their homes. And this became a hub that had hundreds of people go through it, whether it was soldiers, law enforcement, emergency responders, civilians, volunteers, you name it, coming through here. And as such, like you said, Avi, it became a hub also for the psychological treatment. Those coming out of battle zones were getting their refreshments there and just sitting down to relax a little bit. And they'd have, Sharon, you can explain what Jennifer and others who were there were actually doing with them there.
Well, I think it's important to pick up on what you're saying, this mass emergent zone in which everybody is in shock. Everybody is in a state of trying to process this traumatic incident, from the people who were called into reserve duty to the people who had experienced it to our volunteers who were down there and going in and out of the affected areas. Everybody was in a state of trying to process this, and it was completely chaotic. So the idea in terms of trying to protect our people going in and out was to prepare them for what they might see and give them, rather than have it hit them like a wave of shock, to prepare them for what they might see, to give them some tools for what they could do if they began to feel overwhelmed and flooded, and then to check in with them when they came back to see how they were doing. Because sometimes intervention in the moment can prevent future problems down the line. But we needed to touch base with them. So we had almost like a psychotrauma check-in center for them when they came back.
We literally built that big
tent, like a tent
out there that was isolated. It was like, on the side, isolated, so you could have the quiet over there, taking them away from the chaotic action going around.
I don't know if anyone's ever done that. I mean, we always have medical tents in emergency sites. No. When do we have a psychotrauma tent? But we did.
No, and we'll talk about it. I think we speak about it in the episode of whatever in Florida when we had the mission to so working right next to the disaster site of the Surfside Champlain Towers collapse. Going out there, they had tents there with food and whatever, but going there with the dog and the teams and Batya and
we were a mobile mental health unit.
Literally bouncing from one site to another, and we'll talk about that on a different episode. But anyway, so back to October 7th and the days to follow. We, as the day was going on, and we were seeing how many volunteers were coming. We had over the first 24 hours over 1,000 volunteers. Over 1,000 volunteers deploy and operate down south. And in the days to follow, you can double that number, which posed a challenge. Not only, there were those who we could get in that field tent that we had, but that's like a drop in the sea.
Let me give you a story about one who did not come to the tent, okay? A medic on one of our United Hatzalah ambulances and the driver of that ambulance, who is also a medic, took 2 commando forces soldiers riddled with bullets into the back of their ambulance. The driver was up front, and the medic in the back was alone with 2 dying Special Forces soldiers. He went to put an IV in one of the arms. Do you know this story? Okay. Have you told this on the podcast?
Nope.
Okay.
I've never heard the story.
He went to put an IV in one of the soldiers, and the soldier grabbed his arm and said, and roughly translated, "Under no circumstances do you treat me before you treat my brother." And so he wouldn't allow him to put in the IV, and the medic went to the other soldier. Again, the soldier grabbed his arm and said, "Do not put this IV in me. You must put it in my brother." Now, they're not biological brothers, but in Special Forces, they're brothers in every sense of the word.
Brothers in arms.
He said it was a ping pong back and forth between 2 dying soldiers. And eventually he just grabbed the arm of one and put the IV in by force because he didn't want to lose both of them. And he told us a couple of weeks later, we had a processing session with all of the medics who had done, kind of transported under fire. We had about 30 of them there. And he said in this group, I was jealous. He said it was such a strange emotion to feel toward 2 dying men. I was jealous because I felt this is Kol Yisrael Arivim Ze Bazeh. This is what you're supposed to feel when you feel that we are one for the other. And that emotion, he says, stays with me to this day. It was a really beautiful moment.
Wow. I mean, there were so many stories. So, I mean, it was even just getting out and understanding, looking at our logs and seeing how many volunteers and who went out there, and understanding that we're going to need to go out and hunt down every single one of these volunteers and get Sharon, you and the team to either meet for a briefing session as groups or as individuals to make sure we get out to everyone, because we understood that if we don't, this can explode in our face later. But
we did. We got all of them. There were 1,800 volunteers.
Exactly.
And every one of them was followed up. Every one. Right down to the end, meaning those who needed further treatment beyond the groups that we provided them to debrief, they got fully subsidized therapy for as long as they needed it.
It's a volunteer that leaves his home and goes out to risk his life in order to save others as a volunteer, the organization sees a responsibility. It's not a job. It's not. It really is something that's way beyond. So I think that's part of the mission, is go safely, come back safely, and physically and mentally. And we've been so challenged on October 7th with this go safely and come back safely, because even on the physical side, so many people went in. We threw out the window the safety first on this day.
Absolutely.
And
from a psychological standpoint too.
As well. True.
So I want to share a story that I had on the 7th, where a car stopped where we were at Chilitz, where we had like the
staging area. We spoke about that in there.
And they said we have to go to this hospital. So I said, why? We have here triage. And they said, no, we have 2 dead soldiers in the back of the car. So I said, leave them over here instead of go back into fight. And then I opened the door and looked at the 2 soldiers, and it flashed back me to Meron and to other things I saw. And I slammed the door. I went away and started crying. And I was like, this is not the time to cry. And this adds on to other stories I had. At the evening of the 7th, I went to the army for 4 months. I went into Gaza and saw also other dead soldiers. And I can say that, number one, know that I have a psychotrauma unit behind me. Helped a lot. I had people from Psychotrauma calling me before I went into Gaza, after I went into Gaza, asking about the 7th. And knowing that I have the back of Psychotrauma Unit 1, 2, Psychotrauma calling me, helped me refresh myself and clean out all kinds of thoughts and feelings I had. I'm still not 100%. No one can be 100% after the 7th, but I know if I'm 70% now, if I wouldn't have Psychotrauma, I would be 30%. And that's, for me, it's crazy.
We're all post-traumatic. Actually, a book recently came out saying that it's a country in post-trauma.
Yes.
A country in post-trauma. But Sharon, I'd like to ask you to share a little bit about, I know you were very, very busy personally. You had a very special mission that you were on as part of of what we were doing out there. Share a little bit, because for those who don't know, during the war and on October 7th, about 180,000 Israelis were evacuated from their homes, whether it was down south in the towns that were attacked near Gaza, or whether it was from the northern border, which until today are still evicted from their homes for over a year, not knowing yet when they're going to go back while war is going on in Lebanon. And they were evicted to hotels. So families are leaving homes, a house with, their kitchen, your living room, your bedrooms, and maybe possibly a garden.
And your day job, and your school.
And your day job, and your school, and everything. And you're stuck in a 25-meter room.
People showed up in pajamas at that hotel. Some guy came to me as soon as I walked into the hotel and showed me a picture of his house, which was just a hole where his home had been. He and his wife and his 2 kids were in pajamas, and that was what they had. They had a little plastic bag with some supplies from the safe room, and that was what they had.
Because it caught them at 6:30 in the morning while they were still in their beds.
Exactly.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about the hotels and what that looked like, because this went to the next step of not only treating our own volunteers, but actually what we were able to do on the community level in response, especially with this mass evacuation.
And that's, I have to say that's really what I love most about the Psychotrauma unit. It's the outreach to the community. I love our fellow medics. We're all one family. You guys know that because we've known each other for a lot of years. But reaching out on that day and on that week was extremely powerful for me personally, because psychotrauma is about treating in the moment, is about trying to lower the risk of PTSD for the future. And I'll just give you one example that comes to mind. There was a soldier, I won't give you her real name, I'll call her Donna, who I saw walking around the hotel. The hotels, just so you understand, were in the Dead Sea area because there were very few sirens and missile attacks in that area, and they didn't want to trigger and re-traumatize these families. So the Gaza Strip settlements from Be'eri and Sderot and all of the settlements and the areas, the cities like Ashkelon and Ashdod, were all being taken to those hotels, and one after another, they were opening up more hotels to take people
what the
in.
government did was the government basically contracted
Yes.
all of the hotels
Yes.
in this touristic area, cleared them out, and populated
put people into the rooms
by the villages and towns.
Correct. So the short answer to your question is it was chaos. It was chaos as we would expect. People walking in pajamas with plastic bags, looking kind of wild-eyed and in shock and still trying to process what had happened on that day and that week. And I see a 19-year-old young woman with an M16 about the size, she's about 5 feet tall. She's got an M16 about the size of herself, walking around in shorts and a T-shirt. And her hair's a little messy on top. She's walking around in flip-flops. I don't know what she's doing there. And eventually her mother comes over to me and says, I see that you're a psychologist. Do you think you could speak to my daughter? So I talked to the 19-year-old and asked her if she would be willing to speak to me. And she tells me the following story. She was in Machane Zikim, the Zikim army base, when the terrorists overtook the gate. And she was responsible at the time, she was in a commander's course, responsible for 19 or 22, I think 22 young recruits who did not know how to shoot a gun. She was in search and rescue, and she said to me...
It's a boot camp.
Exactly, but they had really just arrived. And she said, I joined the army to save lives. I'm in search and rescue. I know how to shoot a gun, but that's not why I joined the army. All of a sudden, I find myself with 22 recruits. I throw them behind the safe wall. I'm trying to figure out when they throw the grenade around the safe wall, because it's really just a wall, am I going to jump on the grenade or am I going to try and throw it back? She starts shooting, trying to protect her people, and she feels her face is wet, and she sees that a bullet pierced her helmet, and she has a bullet in the head.
Wow.
And she continues to text her father, who's in special forces, please come and help me. I'm running out of ammunition. She's protecting the soldiers, and she's simultaneously shooting. Her commander died, his commander died, and his commander died. So she is all alone. And she was alone for about an hour and a half until her father managed to get past the terrorists who were outside Zikim and come in with his buddies to help clear out the camp. When I met her, she said to me, I'm supposed to start an officer's training course in a month. I don't think I can do it. We spoke for an hour and a half that day, for an hour and a half the next day. I've stayed in touch with her since. And I'm happy to report that today she is an officer. She went back to the camp, she trained, and she's an officer. I had goosebumps when I found out.
Crazy.
It was an incredible story, an incredible experience. And I said that all the people that I met there, if she was the only person I had met, it would have been worthwhile. I mean, I showed up there for an 8-hour shift, and then they said to me, we need you here for 3 days. And I said, well, these are my clothes. I'll sleep in the car. I don't mind staying, but I have nothing on me. So I just wound up staying. But it was an incredibly powerful experience meeting these people, and very inspiring.
It's unbelievable. So for how long? I mean, you were there for a couple of going back and forth, and then working on with the volunteers. Getting a group. Tell us a little bit about the group of volunteers that was appointed to you as part of our reaching out and finding. Remember, we were talking about the 1,800 volunteers, finding all of them and creating the groups. Tell us a little bit about how that worked, and try to explain how that actually worked and what your impressions were and the outcome of it at the end of the day.
Okay. Well, we definitely want to get a hold of our volunteers sooner rather than later and assess them for potential stress symptoms that might develop into PTSD. Initially, we call it an acute stress reaction for the first month. And after that, it can develop into PTSD. So we want to get a look at them. We want to see, how are they talking? How are they able to process? And we want to do a guided processing with them. Most of them hopefully won't develop PTSD, but we want to be able to speak about it in a forum with other people who experience the same thing. At the end of the day, I'm not really doing treatment. I'm guiding a session with a group of people, and we took the 25 or 30 paramedics and medics who had really gone in under fire. It was kind of the, intense group of people who had gone in under fire for hours on end. And if we have time for a story, I'll tell you a story about that.
Sure.
Okay. There was one who was quiet for the entire 3 hours, and everybody was pointing to him and saying, kind of behind my back, saying, talk to him. But I don't like to make anybody speak if they don't want to speak. Finally, I turned to him and I said, listen, maybe you don't want to speak and that's okay. But maybe there are other people in the room who could be helped of what you have to say. So he said, okay, I'll speak. He said, I stopped at 6:30 in the evening to take a drink in the hospital for 2 minutes. And in those 2 minutes, I killed 2 people. There was silence in the group. I killed 2 people. This guy who single-handedly pulled out dozens and dozens of bodies under fire saw himself as a murderer. And that's the importance of groups like this. He then was able to talk about why he took the drink, why he needed to take the drink, and how all of the stuff that he knew afterwards was not relevant, because in that moment he had to take care of himself.
I have goosebumps because I remember that.
You remember that
session.
story?
I remember that session. I was actually there. I was on that group. I remember that individual, and he actually underwent a lot of therapy after that. But it was only because of the ability. I mean, I remember in that session we had some very, very, very powerful stories coming out there of experience of what people went through, and I'm literally I have.
But
chills.
Dovie, if we had not had that session, this individual would have gone through life seeing himself not as the hero, not as the hero that he was, but as the murderer. And so that's why we have to catch them early.
Exactly. Wow. You just threw me back a year. You just threw me back a year. So I think that this gives an understanding a little bit. I mean, we spoke about psychotrauma, but bringing it to scale, I think it's unprecedented anywhere in the world at this level. I agree with that. I don't think that any emergency service in the world provides something like this or has performed on something like this on such scale. And I think that there are so many lessons learned for us as well moving forward, and this understanding the importance of it. And I know we always try to speak publicly and speak out on behalf of emergency responders and first responders and the importance of their mental wellness, because we're all aware of the suicide rates of first responders, and it's a challenge.
But we're destigmatizing it, Dovie.
Absolutely.
It's exactly what Avi was saying before. We're destigmatizing
That's
it.
why I have no problem standing in front of a camera and saying, I, Dovie Maisel, am post-traumatic. I suffer from PTSD. And, with the white beard and being in EMS for over 30 years, I try to tell the younger generation, do not hide it. Do not. And you know what? You said destigmatized it in the organization today, in United Hatzalah. I think that at large, nobody is afraid to go into a venting session after an event. It's standard. I mean, if they treat or do a treatment, not even terror attack, they'll do CPR on a baby. They know to expect that phone call a couple of hours later, and it has become standard. And I think it's something that should be really, especially looking after a day like this of October 7th. It's
become part of the culture of our organization. Yeah, and I think that's
it's
very
something
unique.
That we could share globally. It shouldn't be ours to keep.
What we did just now is we texted all the people that got treated by us, that we know that went out of the 7th. We texted them. We had phone calls with them. We had sessions with them because we know our people are waiting for it. And some people will get the message to say everything's okay. And it could be everything's okay. It could be not okay. But having someone in back asking for your mental health and making sure you're there, even if you're not 100%, knowing that they're there for you, that makes a big difference.
Huge, yes.
Unbelievable. Wow. It just, dealing with it personally always brings it close to home. And
I want
we're
to add
difficult.
something, Dovie. You sitting here saying, I have PTSD, okay? As Sharon just said a few minutes ago, you saved the life of this specific guy or this soldier, okay? By explaining to them 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this guy's not going now for the next for his life thinking he killed 2 people. You standing up now and saying, I'm PTSD. I'm sure people that are listening and watching this podcast, well, even if it's one person, okay, like this soldier you treated, even if it's one person, you saved the life just now.
That should be my reward then.
Absolutely.
And Dr. Slater, if there's anything else you want to add before we wrap up, any personal encounters, or just how looking back 1 year after at this horrendous day, your takeaway.
I think my takeaway is that it's been a horrendous year for all of us, but it's also been a year of tremendous growth. We've grown unfortunately, we've had so much practice as the psychotrauma unit. We've gotten better at what we do because we had to sharpen our teeth on October 7th, and we had to do it in a very intense, extreme, and sudden way. But this year has made us better. And so one of the things I always like to look at is not just where the pain is and where the suffering has been, but how have we grown? How are we stronger? How are we better today, a year post October 7th? And the answer is we all are, in different ways. We all are, as a unit, as a group, as individuals.
Wow. Dr. Slater, Sharon, I feel like I just completed another session of therapy.
I'll bill you.
I'm sure you will. And it's good we could laugh a little bit after a year, and it's still challenging. But I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule.
Thank you, Dovie.
You volunteer a lot as it is, but to come and share these stories with everyone, I think is very important. And Avi, of course, working with you every day is a fantastic and tremendous privilege. So thank you guys very much for joining me for this very special last episode of our 8-episode podcast about October 7th. Thank you.
Thank you, Dovie.
Okay, wow, Dovie. It was 8 episodes. Very, it's difficult because I think that we are still processing all the stuff that was at October 7th and after, and we still at war. But if you'll take these 8 episodes and we'll think about everything that we heard here, I think that the assumptions, it's one of the biggest problem in this kind of event, because it's
tough. It's tough to wrap up because this is like a very long therapy session.
It's a very long therapy session, and it's like everything that you think about stuff and you learn about stuff, but when you got to this event, you understand that everything that you learn and everything that you think is different. And now you should think quickly, different, and out of the box. And you should find the solutions to problems that are all over the place. And eventually, it's very, very difficult to see our people slaughtered. And I think we're part of the history of this event.
I think it's so well said. So well said, Elad. We're still processing. This was going in and not picking at the wounds, but opening them up and digging deep into them on this year of remembering that tragic and horrific day. It was one long therapy session. And yes, a lot of lessons learned. We've changed and implemented throughout this year many changes, and we spoke about them in these episodes. We're constantly trying to learn, constantly trying to implement change. I hope that you guys out there, first responders, community, anyone who's following and listening, had their takeaways from these events, whether on a personal level or on a professional level, seeing, learning, and even just observing what real heroes look like. And we only had just a few of them, but there were thousands of them throughout this year. And if I have to conclude these 8 episodes, I would say that we have an amazing society in Israel, a unique voluntarism spirit, and a desire for life. And I think that is tremendous, and it's inspiring, and it gives us the power and will to continue pushing forward. And we hope that we'll be able to continue sharing our experiences here. I want to thank you, Elad, and I want to thank our viewers, our listeners, for being with us on this journey of these 8 episodes of unfolding the 36 hours of October 7th. People used to call it here the Black Shabbat. And I said, it's the heroic Shabbat, because heroes stemmed out of the disaster and it came out here from the Israeli society, whether, of course, the United Hatzalah volunteers, but in every community, those who fought literally in bare hands, the terrorists, and those who assisted in any way, shape, or form that they could when the big system came to a freeze. We have an amazing society, and I think we share values with any one of you, our listeners. Share these values. So I hope you all have your takeaways. I know we have ours. I know we have we'll need to keep processing this and obviously sharing with you in future episodes. So just as I wrap up, I just want to say that after doing these 8 episodes, going hour by hour, minute by minute of these days, I just want to say that everything that we did in these 8 episodes was in honor and in memory of all first responders from all agencies that went out selflessly on this tragic and horrific day, went into the line of fire selflessly in order to save lives of others, and perished in memory of the 1,400 people who were slaughtered and killed in their homes, and in honor of all those who got injured while saving others. You will not be forgotten, and in our hearts forever. And in honor of those who are still held in captivity by Hamas in Gaza, we are waiting for you all to be brought home. Thank you.